Good afternoon. Ooh, good afternoon, everyone. I can hold this away. I think with this mask, I have to talk so loud, right? So I don't have to. So I think we can probably do it this way. Thank you for coming. We really didn't know what to expect, so this is a very pleasant, very nice turnout. We appreciate everyone being here. And I am Kay Ratzlaff, and I'm the supervisor at the Florida Instructional Materials Center for the Visually Impaired. And we're going to go through all the projects and let everyone introduce themselves. And then we'll jump right into all your handouts should be in your folders on your chairs.
So good afternoon. My name is Kelly Claude, and I am one of the executive co-directors of the Florida Inclusion Network, and I'm very happy to see all of you all here, and I'm very excited to present with these folks. This is our first time presenting together, and we have some fabulous things to share with you. I will say too, if you have just come in, if you would make it a point, please, to sign in on the back. There's a sign-in sheet on the back table, and if you need a packet, there are some more here on the front chairs, and we'll make sure that you leave with a packet if you don't have one right now. So thank you for being here. I'm gonna pass it over.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Sherry Hart. I'm with the Florida Instructional Materials Center for the Visually Impaired. I am one of 3 statewide educational specialists, and we cover the whole state of Florida. We'll be going over that a little bit more coming up. There are some additional packets on the round table where the projector is, so if you'd like to grab one of those, feel free. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Scott Walsh. I'm with the Resource Materials and Technology Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. I am one of 5 deaf education and training specialists for the state of Florida, and so excited to be here today with you guys.
Okay, so just moving forward here, just know that the handouts are available, obviously here for you in paper, but they're also available electronically if you'd like to share this, or the QR code to get to that link. You're able to access and share those with other folks as well. And just a little brief description of our agenda today. We're going to provide you with some descriptions of our projects, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the basics of inclusion, including some of the laws, ESSA, IDEA, the Florida Statute for Inclusion, and a little bit of a talk on inclusive beliefs. And then we're going to share what families can do from the DHH strategies and resources, and some VI strategies and resources, and then talk about how you can be part of that collaborative team to advocate effectively. Okay, so the Florida Inclusion Network, this is our mission. And the Florida Inclusion Network has been around for about more than 20 years in the state of Florida, and our goal is to work with districts and schools to promote inclusive opportunities for students with disabilities so that they have the same opportunities as their peers without disabilities moving forward in life, so they have the same educational, social, and future opportunities as their peers. And we do that through building capacity with the districts, so working with districts to make sure that they have the information and the knowledge to support students with disabilities, all kinds of disabilities, and then looking at school-based problem solving and planning, because that's where the classroom actually, the implementation part is at that classroom, so that we make sure that schools have the capability of implementing the inclusive best practices. We also provide information and work with families with regard to information about inclusion, sharing practices, sharing things that they can have conversations with the schools about. And then we have lots and lots of resources and products. So our website has lots of things that families might want to look at as well, some little videos talking about services. So feel free to check us out on the web.
All right, thank you, Kelly. So just curious, how many of you are here because you are interested in students with visual impairments? Raise your hands, please. All right, and I'm assuming then that everyone else is thinking in terms of children who are deaf and hard of hearing. Am I correct? Anybody, any outliers? Any? Okay, good. That helps. Just kind of about half and half. So that's like perfect. And so Sherry and I are vision. So come up at the end if you've got more questions. Scott and Carmelina's back there, and they're DHH, and then Kelly is inclusion. And so we are all staunch supporters and believers in the importance of inclusion for our students. And so that's why this was such a perfect opportunity for us to come together and talk to parents especially. So we're really excited about that. So the Florida Instructional Materials Center for the Visually Impaired, FIMC for short. And we've been around a long time. They opened the center in 1972. So we've been doing this for almost 50 years. We are a statewide resource center for K through 12 and visually impaired in public, private, and homeschool programs. So if your child is blind or visually impaired, they can get services through us in one shape or form. We do operate under the Bureau of Exceptional Student Education. They recently changed their name, and that's hard for us to do at this age. And we operate on an annual grant with them. We are housed in Tampa, and Hillsborough County Public Schools is our fiscal agent. Who's got the clicker? Okay, there we go. Thank you. It's because I only have two hands. So just a quick overview of what we do. Our big thing is the procurement and production and distribution of accessible instructional materials. Well, what the heck does that mean? So we give Braille and large print books, as well as helps teachers and students access digital books. So books is one of the biggest functions of our center. The other thing we do is a lot of professional development, this kind of stuff, and that's what Sherry and the team of statewide educational specialists, they go all over the state. I said we go from Pensacola to Key West. You've got a kid who's blind, visually impaired, we probably know them. And then we also, just this morning, I was at a meeting on Braille assessments. And so any of the statewide assessments, the Florida Standards Alternate Assessment, the Florida Standards Assessment, all of those things, we're involved in making sure that those are done correctly. We have a federal project that we work with is the American Printing House for the Blind. So a lot of those cool toys, the Braille writers, the maps with the tactile stuff on them, then that's the kind of stuff that comes from there. We also have a loan library. So if you see something and you think, I wonder if that would work for my child, let's see if FIMC has it. And then you can borrow it from us, you can check it out and see if that's something that is going to be viable for your child to use. And then we have the coolest ever family and children events. So we have a festival of families every year in September. We're doing it in September, and it will be totally virtual this year. It had to be virtual last year, and it was such a success that we're doing it again virtually this year. So you don't even have to get in your car. You can sit at home on your computer and do all the cool, fun things, and we have activities for the kids. And then we also do a Braille Challenge, which is a national program where I kind of compare it to a spelling bee for Braille readers, but it's not just spelling. It's spelling and reading and writing and tactile graphics and digital, and it's the whole thing. So Braille Challenge is really fun, and Cane Quest is our last one, and that is an orientation and mobility contest. So that just a brief. Oh, and our Scholastic book program, I can't believe I almost forgot that. Scholastic is also where if you have emergent readers, think Curious George, Goodnight Moon, that level, and they need to be a Braille reader, then we have what we call the Scholastic book, which they can get those little books in what we call twin vision, print and Braille. So it's got the print for mom and dad and the older brothers and sisters to read, and it has the Braille right there in the book for the child who is a Braille reader. So that's what we do. All right, RMTC. Scott.
Awesome.
So you've got your mic up there.
Hi guys, my name is Scott Walsh, and I'm going to be representing RMTC DHH, or the Resource Materials and Technology Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. We are a statewide discretionary project funded by the Florida Department of Education and Bureau of Exceptional Student Education. We collaboratively support the education of students who are deaf and hard of hearing in the state of Florida. Our project is housed on the campus of the Florida School for the Deaf and Blind, and we are located out of St. Augustine, Florida. RMTC-DHH plans and works collaboratively with school districts statewide, agencies, associations, and other state and federal discretionary projects to ensure accessibility and the pedagogical needs of all students with hearing loss are met as required by IDEA 2004 and by the Florida state statutes. RMTC-DHH works to positively influence student outcomes and graduation rates with an emphasis on college, career, and life readiness by supporting parents and school personnel in Florida serving students who are deaf and hard of hearing in a K-12 setting. Our project offers professional development, on-site observation, consultation, training, and technical assistance, as well as offers a free loan library. RMTC-DHH also provides language evaluations and assessments, information and referrals, and tons of resources. All services and materials that are available from RMTC-DHH are provided at no charge to the Florida stakeholder.
Okay, so that's a little bit about us. We'd like to learn a little bit more about you. So we're going to do a quick community builder. It's called Stand Up, Sit Down. And when we click the slide, if the question or the statement on the slide applies to you, we want you to stand up. If you're not able to stand up, raise your hands high. Okay, so this next one, okay, just gave you the direction. So is this takeoff, touchdown? If it's yes, stand up. If it's no, sit down. So if you are a teacher, stand up. Thank you. Yay. And it's the end of the year. Congratulations, you made it. If you are a dog person, there you go. Wow, a lot of dog people in here. Okay, let's wait and see what happens here. I want information about vision. There we go. All right. I'm a parent. And I'm standing extra tall here too. Okay, a lot of parents. Thank you. I want information about deafness. All right, got some dual standards there, so that's good. I'm a cat person. Look out for the dog people. Nice. And I want information about inclusion. Oh, that makes me feel good. All right, thank you very much. And it's good to get to know what your needs are here just a little bit more as well. And I'm going to start out talking a little bit more about the foundations of inclusion. So just a quick summary of tips for parents if you want things, the basic takeaways. We're going to talk about the laws. So that is the first tip, is know what the laws say about inclusion. We're going to talk about the Every Student Succeeds Act, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We're going to talk about Florida's statute that talks about inclusion, that defines inclusion for the state of Florida. And then we're going to talk about some foundational beliefs, a mindset about inclusion that includes that definition, some ideas about presumed competence and the least dangerous assumption. And we're going to finalize this little section talking about the BPI. And if you haven't been familiar with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. So starting off with the Every Student Succeeds Act. This is the federal law for all students, all K through 12 students. This law was originally 50 years ago enacted. It most recently, before it became ESSA, was known as No Child Left Behind. So in 2015, it was reenacted as ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. There were some major components within ESSA that apply very distinctly to students with disabilities. It very clearly states that students with disabilities are general education students first. So that's your foundation. So you're looking at that playing field is even there when you talk about students with disabilities. General education students first. It very explicitly states that all students are taught to high standards. The expectations are the same. They're very high expectations based on your state standards. And it says lots more about this, but it says that schools have to address the needs of students who are not successful with those standards. So if they're at risk of not meeting the standards, they have to put interventions in place. They have to put services in place and address the individual needs of the students including students with disabilities. This is not the disability law. This is the every student law. So think about that. 7 times under ESSA, it talks about a universal design for learning. And there's a whole couple of days worth of training we could talk about for universal design for learning. But it essentially sets up the classroom so that students can access the learning at the beginning from multiple levels. They can engage with it on different levels, and they can show what they know in multiple ways before you even get started. So that you're building it so that every student can access from the beginning. So if you wanted to read more about it, hear about ESSA, you've got the QR code and the link. But I think it's important that we start there because it does very specifically say all students. The second law that we want to talk about briefly today that impacts our students with disabilities very clearly is the IDEA. This is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Now, the word inclusion is not specified in IDEA. But IDEA does have a very strong preference for education in the general education classroom. That's where it starts. When it talks about the IEP process and the considerations for services and location for services, the first place to consider is always that general education classroom with the appropriate supports and services. So that's the first place considered by the IEP team. A student should only be removed from that general education classroom if their needs can't be met using those services and supports in gen ed. And then that IEP team has the explicit responsibility of determining how much time and what those needs and services are. So IDEA is very important to parents of students with disabilities. There are rights that you have within that, within the legislation, and that's something that you need to be aware of and be familiar with. The QR code will lead you to all of the statute if you would like to read it, all of those regulations. There's a lot to it. There's a whole lot to it. So that was real quick on IDEA. Florida is the only state in the nation that has a definition of inclusion in statute. And it's rather lengthy, so what I did was take little bullets that really, we want to hone in on those words. We want to hone in and think about what that means. If you'd like to read the whole thing, of course, you can QR code and go to the link. But what we want to focus on is a student with a disability receives education in general education settings with natural proportions. Okay, then we'll talk about what that means in just a second, and age-appropriate heterogeneous peers. Okay, in core academics, electives, and special areas. So the whole school community, the whole school environment. A student is a valued member of the school and the class. So when you talk about students with being in classes, like the homeroom class should know that student. They should be part of that homeroom class in general education. The third part of the law is teachers and administrators support universal education and have the knowledge and support available to them. That's part of where we come in as discretionary projects. We help support those students. We help support and do the professional development, technical assistance, so that teachers can have that knowledge and administrators can have the knowledge to support students. And the technical assistance and best practices, instructional methods and supports. Again, that's our kind of our area of expertise, and we work to make sure that those things are happening in the classroom. A quick comment about the natural proportions, because we get a lot of questions about what that means. So in the state of Florida, about 14% of students are students with disabilities overall. So if you're looking at a district, all the students in a district, you kind of want to make sure that it's representative. If the district has a higher proportion of students with disabilities, there may be some questions to ask. There may be some questions compliance-wise and staffing-wise. I mean, it's a comparative note. When you drill that down to the school level, though, you're looking at no more than about 14%. That's where you really want to be, is that natural proportion. You do not want a classroom that is overrepresented by students with disabilities. So if you're in a classroom and students with disabilities that have about 50%, you kind of want to ask some questions about whether effective inclusive practices are in place there. So you're looking at that natural proportion of the occurrence of students with disabilities in the total population. So let's talk about, just generally speaking, what inclusion is. In your handouts, there is a 2-page flyer that talks specifically about what inclusion is. It gives you little excerpts from the law, but it also kind of gives a conceptual framework, because inclusion is a civil right. So it started, the whole IDEA stemmed from the civil rights movement. Okay, and it stemmed from individuals coming back from war in the Vietnam War needing to access life and having accommodations and services provided to them. That's where we started. So it is a civil right. It means all students are learning together. And it's an atmosphere too. We talk about school culture, and we want that inclusive school culture, the mindset. Okay, so now we have students who have needs. Let's make sure that they're always part of it. Okay, how do we modify what we're doing? How do we accommodate the students to make sure that they feel like they are part of everything that goes on at the school? It's collaborated, integrated services. We don't want services in a silo. Like we work together because we want to make sure that you're not just getting your Braille books in a separate classroom. We want to know that those Braille books are being used in an inclusive environment. And the same thing with the interpreters or any of the amplification devices. We want to make sure that's inclusive. And so it requires individuals and service providers talking together, working together to make that happen. So it's support and adaptations within general ed. Remember, that's the place to start. General education first, and then let's see what other supports. And it's based also on highly effective research-based instruction and assessment. Those high expectations go right along with that. So in a kind of a way of thinking about inclusion and how we've progressed, if you look at this continuum, this was previous to IDEA. Students with disabilities didn't even have the right to go to school. We have progressed to, okay, they can come to school, but they're in a separate little space of their own. And then maybe a little bit of movement towards, we're in the general education classroom, but we're in a little small group in the back. To, okay, we're in the general education classroom, but we're still kind of mingling and trying to find that fit for the students with disabilities, to hopefully, getting to a point where every student's individual needs, with or without disabilities, is being met. So we're hoping that you're somewhere here, or your child is somewhere here on this continuum. So that's our goal. That's kind of a think about in terms of the continuum of services and provision of inclusion. I mentioned earlier, all means all. So when we talk about all students with disabilities, we mean students who have speech impairments, students who are dual exceptional, students who have those low incidence disabilities, students who have severe and complex needs. So all really truly does mean all when we talk about inclusion. Nobody is left out. And the mindset behind that starts with the least dangerous assumption. Anybody heard of the least dangerous assumption? So 1984, this was kind of a mind-blowing concept. Ann Donnellan introduced this concept of the least dangerous assumption. And what it states is that in the absence of absolute evidence, it's essential that we make the assumption that if proven to be false, would be the least dangerous to the individual. So when we think about our students who have sensory needs, don't make the assumption that they're not understanding because they can't hear you correctly or they can't see what's going on. We have to assume and then give them the tools in order to access and show what they are able to know. So that least dangerous assumption is a very basic starting point. It goes right along with presumed competence. So let me give you an example of what presumed competence would be. So if you go to a doctor, for example, you presume that that doctor is going to competently diagnose, address your issues, and give you something to manage whatever it is that you've gone there for, right? Same thing ordering in a restaurant. If you go to a restaurant, you order, you give the waiter the order, and you assume that when they transmit it to the kitchen, they're going to competently put it together and it's going to arrive at your table just like you ordered it. Now think about this. Historically, individuals with disabilities have had to prove their competence. So one of the mainstays and one of the main thoughts of inclusion is that we presume competence from the get-go and find a way that those individuals are able to show what they know and communicate what they know. So those two things are very basic. Douglas Bilkin put it together in his research and said presuming competence is nothing more than a Hippocratic oath for educators. So a Hippocratic oath is what? First, do no harm. Okay, so when we talk about inclusion as well, one of the things that our organization does is help schools measure their inclusive practices. So the best practices for inclusive education self-assessment is in statute, and essentially what it says is once every 3 years, every school and every district is going to complete this self-assessment. It's not a test. It's not something that, we go to districts and say, oh, you're not doing this. It is truly a reflective tool for a team to have a conversation and say, here's what we do well. Here are things that we'd like to work on, because the outcome of that best practices for inclusive education, or the BPI process, is identification of a priority that that school or district is going to work on. So in your handouts as well, there are 2 pieces of paper. One is the indicators. There are 34 indicators that schools address. And then the other one is district indicators. There are 30 of those. So it gives you a really quick idea. And if you read through them, what you'll see, and what I like to make the point of very often, is those indicators cover everything, from pre-K to transportation to allocations to post-school outcomes, behavior, access points, students with low incidence disabilities. It's all in there. So a school who addresses these indicators and a district who addresses these indicators, they're really looking and can make a lot of use out of this process to identify what they do next. We look at district data. We talk about school choice. These are some of those indicator topics that are in there as well. All right, I obviously thought ahead of myself here. So these are additional indicators: collaborative planning time, Florida standards, using those Florida standards, having the same opportunities as their peers in school activities. So if you haven't been a part of or have not heard of your school's best practices for inclusive education self-assessment, just know that the majority of the state is moving into that 3rd year cycle this year. So you might want to ask, because parents are a part of that team. They're suggested to be part of that team. So if you're interested in kind of hearing or giving your input or having your voice heard, talk to your school and ask if you can be part of that that BPI assessment. Okay, we're going to move forward then with some of those basic ideas about inclusion and see how they apply here.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, we're going to hone in now specifically on students with visual impairments. And just for a little background knowledge, every student sees differently. You can have a student with the same eye condition, 2 different students, they may not see the same thing. Some students have difficulty seeing distance items. Some students have difficulty seeing near items. Some students have difficulty seeing both. So it's very important that the student's functional vision is assessed to know exactly what they're seeing, what they're not seeing, and how accommodations can help them. And one of the ways that we do that is through learning media. So some students may read print. They have enough vision. It may need to be enlarged for them in order for them to see it. That's one of the things that would be determined through the assessment. Some students may need to read Braille. They don't have enough functional vision to see the print. So they would be taught and instructed in Braille. And then we do have a number of students that use both. These are called dual media learners. They have vision, but maybe it's a progressive condition and they will be losing their vision. So to prepare them for that, we would begin instruction in Braille. Or they may just fatigue when they're using their eyes and may need to transition to Braille. So we do run the gamut of learning media, and that is assessed through their functional vision assessment. So, students with visual disabilities, they have difficulty learning the same way as other children. It doesn't mean that they can't learn the same things. They will have a teacher that is specially trained, a TVI, that evaluates the student to see exactly what their needs are, how their vision affects their learning, and what tools or accommodations they may need to be successful within a general education setting. The TVI also provides specially designed instruction on the expanded core competencies, which is the areas of the ECC. We love our letters in ESE. And these help to ensure that the student is as independent and as successful as possible. We are going to go into those in detail in a few minutes. There are 9 of them, and these are the areas that are known to be impacted by vision loss. And finally, the classroom teacher would provide instruction using the Universal Design for Learning to include all students, including the students with visual impairments in their class. We're going to go over the expanded core competencies briefly. There are, like I said, there are 9 of them. These are the areas that are impacted by vision loss. And so it is the responsibility of the teacher of the visually impaired to look at, assess, and instruct in all of these areas. And they are also required to do that every 3 years. It is one of the few programs within the state that is required to do an automatic reevaluation every 3 years, because the needs of the students with visual impairments do change as the child grows and learns. So we do look at all 9 areas every 3 years. The first area is compensatory skills. And what are compensatory skills? Those are the basic competencies that are required to function in a classroom. They could be listening skills, they could be reading tactile graphics, reading and writing Braille, using large print, all of those basic skills, organizational skills, hugely impacted by a vision loss. All of those fall under compensatory skills. The next one would be career education. Looking at giving the students the tools and the knowledge needed to obtain and retain employment. Also looking at suitable careers. There are some things, and that field is expanding more and more, but there are some things that are a little bit easier to do if you have sight, and some things that you wouldn't necessarily want to get in a bus with the driver that has no sight. So we do spend a lot of time on career orientation and education within the field. The next area is assistive technology, and this is both high-tech and low-tech devices. So are they able to use computers? What do they need? Do they need voiceover? Do they need the computer to speak to them? Do they need electronic equipment? Whatever they need to be successful in that educational setting, whatever it may be, at work and at home. The next one is independent living. Daily living skills. How can they function as independently as possible? This can include personal care, household operations, money management, eating, time management, all of those that you need to be successful, independent adults. Self-determination. How can they stand up for themselves and make sure that their needs are being met? How can they advocate for themselves? We want to make sure that we're building that into the program as they're learning, they're practicing it in school, because once they leave us and go off to higher education, a job, wherever, a lot of those supports fall off. So they need to be able to handle those themselves. So we teach those along the way. Next, we come to social skills. Because sight, most learning is done through sight, facial expressions aren't necessarily seen. They don't know. They have to rely on intonation and sound. We work on a lot of social skills, making sure that they're able to communicate effectively, that they are active participants in their learning through their communication and social skills, because a lot of that is done through sight. Sensory efficiency is using all of the senses to the best of their abilities. So using whatever vision they have, and then also learning through their auditory channels, their touch channels, using whatever kind of optical or aids that they may need, or alternative communication devices. If they are using an alternative communication device, making sure that it is appropriate for them. Is it large enough? Does it need some tactile symbols on it so that they can feel it if they can't see it? All of that is incorporated in that. Orientation and mobility. That is knowing where children are in space in relation to their body. And also the travel skills needed. This is where the white cane comes into play. They are taught how to move, how to travel, how to get from class to class. Eventually, when they get older into high school and beyond, how will they take a bus? How will they use ride share? Because most of our students will not be drivers. So from a young age, they're taught all of those skills, so when they do graduate, they can be independent travelers to get, hopefully, to and from a job. And then the final one is recreation and leisure. If you have a visual impairment, a lot of times you can't see what's happening around you. They don't often know what to do with their free time and what they can do, so we do take time and spend specific teaching hobbies, physical activities. They can learn all of these things just in a different way. You also get some socialization in there because of the following rules and the turn taking, all very important skills. So what can you do as parents to help your student if they do have a visual impairment? Absolutely work with your child's teachers, first and foremost. Become an integral part of that process. Work with this teacher, the TVI, and both the classroom teacher. The more collaboration you can get, the more inclusion you can get, the better off the students are. You want to take your child to as many places as possible. A lot of times, students learn through incidental learning and watching others do it, seeing things happen on TV and around them that our students with visual impairments do not have that opportunity for. They learn through doing. So it's amazing that you brought them here. If you brought them here, take them with you. Take them to places. That's how they're going to learn. Experience is the best teacher. Students with visual impairments have to do something as many times as a sighted child has seen it done. If you think about it, before a child ever makes a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, they've probably seen that process happen 100 to 500 times before they're asked to do it. And our children don't have that opportunity. They have to practice it as many times as they've seen it done. So practice, practice, practice. I know it's hard, it's messy. The more opportunity you give them, the better off they are. And I talked about how much of learning occurs visually. Use concrete and real objects as much as possible. The real objects, there's no comparison. If you give them a plastic cow or a cat or something like that, it's not the same thing. It doesn't translate tactily. You can use it to teach certain aspects, but if the real object is available, you always want to try and use that. Ask your child if they need assistance. Build in that independence from a very young age. They may not always need it, and they may need to learn through practice and trial and error. So the less you just jump in and do for them, the better off they are. Let them practice. Ask them. Work with your teacher of the visually impaired to learn how to help guide them. There are specific techniques to getting somebody around. They're called human guide techniques, and there are people that are specially trained to work with your student on that and work with you on that. They are called orientation and mobility specialists. That is their job. Try and make it as consistent as possible so that no matter who they're doing it with, it works for them. And encourage independence and self-determination as much as possible from a young age. The higher expectations you have for them, the better off they're going to be. And that gets me into high expectations. So a lot of our parents, a lot of teachers, a lot of people out there that aren't familiar with our students, because we are a very low incidence population, we kind of see them in two camps. One camp is the, oh my gosh, they can't do anything they can't see, and they want to jump in and do everything for them. The other camp is the, oh my gosh, he did that? That's so amazing. And it could be just the simplest thing, like taking a drink. Well, we would expect him to take a drink. Have appropriate expectations for your students and make them as independent as possible. Allow your child to sit where they're most comfortable to see. They will naturally know where they see best. If they need to get closer and move up, let them get up. It is a misnomer that getting too close to a TV will hurt your eyes. They may need to be closer to the TV or the screen or the book. Let them move where they see the best. They will know that. If you have a child that has almost no vision or no vision, talk to them. They can't see what's happening around them. The more you can talk and tell them about what you're doing, the more they're going to learn that through that incidental learning. Tell them what you're doing. It seems strange, very strange, especially at first, but narrate your day. Okay, it's lunchtime. I'm going to make macaroni and cheese. We're going to get it out of the cabinet. We're going to add the water. We're going to put it in the microwave. Do you hear the beeping on the microwave? We're starting it up. It's cooking it. They can't see any of that done. So if you don't narrate that for them, we call them kind of the magical fairies come, and they just plop things in front of them. They have no idea the steps and the processes that it took to get there. So the more you can narrate all of your everyday activities, the more they'll learn through that. It takes practice. It seems awkward at first, but eventually you'll just start doing it, and the kids, it really benefits them. When you are giving oral instructions and directions, be as specific as possible. Over there, they don't know where over there is. To the right, to the left, in front of you, behind you, the more specific you can be, the more they will understand. And finally, when you are at home and in the community, encourage and expect your child to use the tools and the technology that they're learning to use in the school. It's hard, I know. People stop you if they're using a cane. People are very curious. The more practice they can get, the more consistent you are. Kids turn into teenagers, and a lot of times they don't like to be different. If they haven't learned from a young age that this is something that they need, that they use, then they will start refusing to use it. and that doesn't benefit them, and sometimes it can harm them. So the more consistent you are in expecting the use of those tools throughout their day, out in the community, wherever, the more it will be ingrained in them, and they'll use it when they really need it. Okay, so that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and he's going to talk specifically about students with hearing loss.
Thank you, Ms. Sherry. I was looking at some of those points that you had up there, and I'm thinking how much of that is universal design, and how much does that carries over to not just VI, but to DHH or any other potential disability, and that would be just best practice in general to be able to give access. Really love that. Okay, guys. Again, my name is Scott, and I'm going to be here for this last portion of the presentation to talk to you about deaf and hard of hearing. I'm going to lead with Albert Einstein once said that a great thought begins by seeing something differently with a shift of the mind's eyes. Children who are deaf or hard of hearing are a dynamic population. Hearing loss in general can be perceived as a very personalized and unique to the individual. Because of this, it's difficult to target consistencies of areas of impact across multiple settings and multiple students with hearing loss. So as we evaluate areas that impact access for each child, it's imperative to look at the child as an individual and to be able to see the environment through his or her perspective. Likewise, it's also important to note that each individual environment, from the classroom to the home, the child's community, and the people he or she interacts with, impacts them in a different way. Children who are deaf or hard of hearing have unique needs and may require specialized accommodations, some of which you may not be familiar with, or to families or to educators have familiarity with those specialized accommodations. A student's primary mode of communication may be fluid and vary depending on the comfort level, the environment, and the communication partner. Let's take some time to check out access. Access or lack of access may be one of the most underlying factors that determines academic success for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. Each child is unique, and no two students learn in the same way. Under this principle, each child that is deaf or hard of hearing accesses their environment in their own unique way. Influencing factors can be primary mode of communication, relationship or comfort level to the speaker, and the ability to effectively advocate. All of these components play into how successful a student is able to navigate an academic environment. This visual or graphic is really personal to me because there's so many things here as somebody that has a hearing aid and has had a hearing loss. Something as simple as covering your mouth blocks access, or turning to the side blocks the ability to read a person's lips or be able to understand what they're saying. It's not just a sound that we process. We look at body language, we look at facial expressions, we look at lip movements. All of these play into the ability to receive and encode information and then respond with information that's appropriate and accurate. But we use all parts of the body to be able to get that information. So as you look at your interaction and communication with students that are deaf or hard of hearing, if you have the opportunity, look at how often we have face coverings on. Look at how often we speak more than one at a time, or how often we mumble or do not pronunciate as clearly as we possibly could. All of these play into the role and the ability for someone to be able to access that information clearly. And I think that's kind of a really important piece now, especially with face mask on, of how much that has really played into our role in our society of being able to access one another, hearing loss or not. So in the field of deaf education, we often talk about zebras, mainly in part due to Karen Anderson's success for students with hearing loss. When you hear hoofbeats, it's usually horses, not zebras. Children with hearing losses are truly zebras. A hearing loss is typically a disability that is difficult to recognize or identify. Many children with a hearing loss blend into their environment very well and have adaptive skills to navigate their surroundings, which allows them to go unrecognized. It takes a specialized person to identify indicators that a student may have a hearing loss and that hearing loss may impact an array of academic and social factors in the educational environment. That person in the field of education is known as a teacher of the deaf. Students who are deaf or hard of hearing have a very specific and individualized needs that must be met to allow them to participate in all areas of the school community. A specially trained teacher of the deaf is an integral member of the student's individual education plan team with expertise in hearing-related disabilities and evaluates the student to determine how their hearing level impacts their ability to access the academic setting and makes recommendations for tools and accommodations that provide the student access to the curriculum and to the school day. The teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing then provides specially designed instruction through Florida Expanded Skills and or speech auditory training standards. These specialized standards have been created to support students who are deaf and hard of hearing to target skills and academic content to promote independence, self-advocacy, and ultimately academic and post-secondary success. Multiple research studies have concluded that the brain does not discriminate against the modality of language it receives, whether signed or spoken. All that is required is that the brain receives language. I encourage you to communicate with your child as much and as often as you can. Play with language, embrace language, explore language, and most importantly, let them know that it's okay to make mistakes with language. For parents out there, I need you to hear this from me to you. It is okay to play with language, and it is okay to make mistakes with language. Give yourself grace. Know that we're all in this together and that we're all learning as we go. Just as practice makes perfect, it takes repetitive opportunities and experience to build confidence in using language. Be the person that cultivates these experiences for your child. As children begin to identify which language modality they can access and use the easiest, their engagement with others will increase, leading to effective communication with others. Access is key and ensures that whatever language your family chooses to use, make sure it's accessible to your child. Once this hurdle is achieved, the real fun begins. From social interactions to academic engagement to building meaningful connections with others, breaking language barriers opens doors and begins exploring and learning in all areas of life. Collaborate with your child's educational team to establish an environment that is accessible throughout the student's entire day. Remember that every moment is an opportunity to build language. Use educational settings to springboard these opportunities and capitalize on the resources available from the school. So by now you're probably recognizing a common theme here. Hold the bar high. If there's one thing that I can share with you that's made a difference in my life, is having someone hold a bar as high as they possibly can for me. Not just in school or just at home, but in all areas of my life. I'm going to speak personally for a moment. I would have never known what I'm capable of if I didn't have family and my teachers constantly guiding me and challenging me to be the very best I could. These moments, the moments I had to really push myself, were opportunities to break barriers that I thought could never be broken, and times I proved to myself that I am capable of more. Having hearing loss is only one small piece of someone's identity. However, if it's the only thing being recognized, talked about, or considered, we're missing the bigger picture. Students who are deaf and hard of hearing can do anything that hearing impairs can except hear. Deaf and hard of hearing children need to know this. They need to know that they are smart, that they're capable, and that their hearing loss does not define what they are able to become. Challenge them to be the very best version of themselves. Don't just give them a voice, rather show them that they have one and that you value what they have to say. If you've had the opportunity to meet one deaf and hard of hearing kid, you've done exactly that. You've met one. Each child is unique. No two children with a hearing loss will have the exact same needs. Cultivate accessibility and authentic language opportunities every moment you get. Be their fiercest advocate and let them know that they matter. And above all else, hold your expectation of them so high that they have no other option than to meet it. If you believe in them, they'll start believing in themselves. Ms. Kelly?
I love that. Thank you, guys. Okay, so we will remain here for a little bit. We do have to transition to the next presenter in this room, but we wanted to bring your attention to two of the handouts in your packet, because the skills that were very specifically discussed, the expanded skills standards for students who are deaf and hard of hearing and the expanded core curriculum, are on the backs of these two cue cards. So if you wanted that record here, and there's tips on the front that have to, for teachers, you can share these. They're on the Florida Inclusion Network website. They're on the websites for the vision and deaf and hard of hearing projects as well. So take those with you. We thank you for coming. We would like you to please fill out a survey. If you'd like to do it electronically, you can do the QR code. If you prefer the paper and pencil method, it's in your packet on the right behind the presentation. Let's see what else here. Our contact information is on this slide as well, so please feel free to reach out to any or many of us, whatever your preference is, and we are always happy to have you here, and we're always happy to talk about your specific needs and what you need to know from us. Anything else? Kay.
And real quick, I was just going to say, we are in the vendor hall also, so if you've got another session you want to get to right after this. So Florida Inclusion Network has a table, and then we're sharing a table with RMTC and the Deafblind Project. So come find us, come talk to us. We've got cards, we've got lots of good stuff we can hand out, share, and we do want to know, and you know, I go back to kind of what Scott said. Different is not bad, it's just different. And learning differently doesn't mean you can't learn. It just means you come about it in a different way. So it's different, you know, how boring would it be if we were all sitting in here and we're just exactly alike? I mean, that would be, I felt sorry for, anyway. So, you know, it's okay. We should celebrate our differences and recognize that's okay. And that doesn't mean that we have, and I loved your graphic, Kelly, with the dots, you know, and I've been around long enough that I remember when those dots were all on the outside of that circle. And it's been a journey to watch the inclusion and how it grows and how it benefits all of us. All of us, our lives are richer when we have that opportunity to be exposed and to communicate and to experience life through other people's modalities. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly. Thank you.
All right, our last slide has our references. If you'd like to read some of the articles in the research that we referenced, they're here, and 2 pages. And thank you very much. We appreciate you.